Greetings, Sin and Space listeners. This particular chapter has a couple trigger warnings, content warnings on it. There's, first of all, a really uncharitable depiction of sex work. I'm sorry about it. It is what it is. There's also mentions of rape and abortion and miscarriage. So if you want to give this episode a skip, basically what happens is they touch down at one of the Pitco Enterprise things, and there's been like an assault on a woman, and it's just very weird. And they're like, "Gee, who could have done this?" "Oh, I don't know. On to our colony, I guess." And the weird reporter guy is like, interesting. How scandalous." So that's all you're missing, in case you don't want to listen. All right, moving on. If you do want to listen, here we go. Sin in Space, Chapter 12. Tony fastened the hood of his parka more tightly around his head as the chill air of the flight crept into the cabin. Graham beside him was full of flip comment and curiosity, to which ordinary decency, let alone special diplomacy, demanded reply. But Tony shifted position and let his eyelids drop closed. There was no mental eye to close, and so thrust out the revised memory of the ridiculous incident with Brenner, nor any mental ear that could turn off the resounding echo of B. Juarez's hilarity. "You knew all along you never hit Brenner, didn't you?" he asked himself angrily. "You could have figured it out for yourself if you wanted to. All right, then, don't think about that." The new colonists. He ought to do something about them, something to dispel the tense, apprehensive silence in the cabin, a speech of welcome, something like that. Thank them for coming? Welcome them to Sun Lake? With the threat that hung over them all, new members and old, any speech like that would be ridiculous. Later in the day, they would be asked to sign final papers, turning over once and for all the funds they'd already placed in the hands of the trustees on Earth, and receiving their full shares in the colony. Before then, they would learn the worst. They would be told about the accusation that might doom the colony. But how could he tell them now, before they had ever seen Sun Lake, before they'd glimpsed the spellbinding stretches of Lacca's Solus, or had the chance to understand the promise implicit in the lab's shining walls and Joey Gracie's neatly laid out experimental fields? And in front of that Gunther, too, how much did he dare to say? Graham could wreck their hopes with a word, or solve their problems as easily if he chose. Graham had exposed the commissioner's corruptness once. He wasn't always just a Gunther. He was a part-time crusader. Possibly he would understand Sun Lake's desperate necessity. Possibly. Tony leaned back, tiredly letting his eyelids droop again in an effort to simulate sleep. Through slitted eyes, he studied the new arrivals. They were crouched on the cabin floor, bundled into their parkas, talking only occasionally. Even Tad, at the far end of the cabin with the Jenkins children, was low-voiced and restrained. Tony could see him pulling miraculous Martian treasures from his pockets for display, and pouncing on the few Earth items the new children had to show in return, cautiously pulled forth from supposedly empty pockets and held for view in a half-cupped hand. Near them, Bessie Jenkins, the mother of the two youngsters, sat half watching them, half talking to the monsieur of the two single girls. D'Antuano? Rose D'Antuano, that was it. Anita Skelly, her vivid red hair concealed under the hood of her parka, was carrying on a conversation in monosyllables with Bob Prentice. They seemed to be communicating a good deal more by hand pressure than by word of mouth. A shipboard romance, Tony wondered. Or had they known each other back on Earth? He shifted his gaze to the other side of the cabin, where the remaining three men sat, Arnold Jenkins, the lanky Bond, and young Zaretsky. They were lined up in a silent row, leaning against the bulkhead, evidencing none of the interested enthusiasm one might have expected. His own depression, the doctor realized, was affecting everyone. What could he say to them? Here they were, newly escaped from Earth, from the madhouse with a time bomb in the basement. It had cost each of them more than he could estimate in courage and money and work to make the escape, and what could he promise them now? With luck, with the help from Graham, with all the rakes, the best they could look forward to was the everyday life of the colony, working like dogs, living like ants, because it was the only way to pull free of the doomed world from which they'd fled. At worst, and the worst was imminent, back on the same rocket, or the next, or the one after that, back with all the others, destitute, back to the Earth, with no money, no job, no place to live, and no hope at all. "Tony." It was Graham again. "Yes?" "It just occurred to me. Do you people charge for guest privileges? I'll be happy to shell out anything you think is reasonable. Sun Lake looks like a good story to me, and I want to say on top of it." It hasn't come up before, Tony told him. That means we'll have to vote on it. Personally, I'd vote for charging you. That's the idea. If I roast you in the book, you can say I was sore because you soaked me. If I give you a good report, you can prove it wasn't bought and paid for. Right. You're too shrewd for us Martian peasants, Graham. I was only thinking that we could use the money. Doc! Bee yelled back into the cabin. Radio! Tony got up and leaned over into the cockpit to accept the earphones Bee passed him. I can only spark a message back, she told him. We didn't load the voice transmitter this trip. He nodded. Through the phones, a self-consciously important teenage voice was saying, Sun Lake to Lazy Girl, Dr. Hellman. Sun Lake to Lazy Girl, Dr. Hellman. Sun Lake... Lazy Girl to Sun Lake, I read you Hellman, he said, and Bee's hand sputtered it out on the key. Sun Lake to Lazy Girl, I read you, 72 at Pitco. Can Lazy Girl 16 Pitco? Over. Dr. Tony to Jim Holloway, he dictated. Cut out the numbers game, Jimmy, and tell me what you want. Over. The teenage voice was hurt. Sun Lake to Lazy Girl, medical emergency at Pitco camp. Can Lazy Girl change course and land at Pitco? Over. Lazy Girl to Sun Lake, Wilco, Jimmy, but where's O'Reilly? Over. Sun Lake to Lazy Girl, I don't know, Dr. Tony. They messaged us that O'Reilly wasn't due back from Marsport all day. Over. Lazy Girl to Sun Lake, we'll take care of it, Jimmy. Out. What's cooking? Demanded Graham. Somebody's sick or something at the Pitco outfit across the hills from our place. Their doctor's still in Marsport. Mind if I stick with you? I'd like to have a look at the place anyhow, when they're not ready for me. Tony considered a moment, and decided he liked the idea. Sure, come along. I'd kind of like to see that girl who was for Pitco. You met her on the rocket? I met her all right, but she gave me a faster freeze than your girl pilot here. What is she anyhow, lady engineer? All brains and no bounce? Not exactly, Tony said. I guess she figured she was on vacation. She's a new recruit for the company brothel. Those are the only women they've got at Pitco. Well, I'll be damned. Graham was silent a moment, then added thoughtfully, No wonder she wasn't interested. Lazy Girl touched down at Pitco near noon. The doctor and writer were met by Hackenberg, the mine boss, who drove out in a jeep as Bee zoomed her ship off over the hills to home. I think you're too late, Doc, he said. We'll see. Hackenberg, Douglas Graham. They climbed in, and the jeep rolled past the smokestacks of the refining plant toward the huts of the settlement. Hell of a thing, grumbled Hackenberg. Nobody's here. Madam Rose, Doc O'Reilly, Mr. Reynolds, all off at Marsport. God knows when they're coming back. Douglas Graham, did you say? You're the reporter Mr. Reynolds was going to bring back. How'd you happen to come in with the doc? I'm the reporter, Graham said. But it's the first I knew about coming here with Reynolds. Did he tell you that? Maybe he just said he hoped you would. I don't know. I got my hands full as it is. I got a contract to be mine boss. Everybody takes off, and Big Ginny gets her chest busted up. The girls go nuts, and I take the rap. What a life! Was there a brawl? Asked the doctor. Nobody told me. They yanked me out of B-Plant. They found Big Ginny over by the hills. She was all messed up. You know what I mean, Doc. They thought she was raped. Rape Big Ginny, for God's sakes. It ain't reasonable. They moved her? They took her back to Rose's. I tell them to leave her lay. Just get 'em warm, give plasma, and wait for the doctor. It don't do no good. The jeep stopped in front of a large house, solidly constructed of the expensive native glass brick. Unlike most of the jury-built shacks that housed the temporary workers in the camp, it was one of the few buildings put up by the company itself, and few expenses had been spared. The door opened hesitantly, and a girl peered out, then opened it all the way. Hello, Hack. Is this the doctor? She was dressed in neither the standard tunic of most Mars women, nor the gaudy clothes of her sisterhood on Earth. Instead, she wore tailor house pajamas of Earth's Cincy velvet. She might have been any businesswoman or middle-class housewife, answering her door back on Earth. Hello, Mary. Hackenberg turned to Tony. Dr. Hellman, this is Mary Sims. She's in charge when Rose is out. I'll have to take off now. The whole house was heated, the doctor noticed. The girl led them through a large and rather formal parlor and into a smaller sitting room. She crossed the small room and opened a door on the far side. In here, doctor, she said. Tony stepped into the small bedroom and heard Graham right behind him. How about me? Demanded the writer. The girl's voice was icy. Professional courtesy, I suppose. We are in the same business, aren't we? By all means, come in. The doctor turned his smile in the other direction. A huge blonde lay on the bed between fresh sheets. She was in a coma, or... Out, Tony said firmly, and closed the door on both of them. He lifted the sheet and swore under his breath. Big Ginny had been washed and dressed in a rosebud-trimmed pink Nera nightgown. Few people with internal injuries could survive such first aid. He opened his bag and began the examination. He stepped into the parlor. Mary rose from her chair to question him, but Tony forestalled her. "She's dead," he added in a puzzled voice. "Her chest was beaten in. Who found her?" "Two of the men. Shall I get 'em?" "Please. And was there anything they found nearby?" "Yes, I'll bring it." The girl went out. "How about the rape?" Graham asked. "She wasn't," Tony said. He dropped into a chair and tried to think it out. The woman had been pregnant, and there were signs of a fresh try at abortion. The rape. Was the father known? Had they tried to abort it? Had there been a scene and a fatal beating out there by the hills? How did you know who was the father of a child conceived in a place like this, and who else would have any reason for the violence? Mary Sims came in and said, "I passed the word for the men." She moved coolly so that her body was between Graham and the doctor, and handed over something wrapped in a handkerchief. "They found this. Did you know she was 6 months pregnant?" "Big Ginny?" she asked, amazed. "Why not?" "Why, I've seen her medical card, and she's been here 2 years. She was married a couple times on Earth." The girl was flustered. Well, it surprised me, that's all." He went into the small bedroom and unwrapped the object she had given him. It was a stained scrap of stout copper wire, about 25 centimeters long. That confirmed his diagnosis. Attempted self-abortion, clumsy and dangerous because of the woman's bulk and probably hazy knowledge of anatomy. But the innumerable blows on her chest and back didn't make any sense. Graham left the doctor to puzzle it over. It was Graham's pride that in researching the story he left no stone unturned, and he told himself deadpan this was no place to change his tactics. Without knocking, he opened 4 doors along the hall. 3 were empty. The 4th showed him what he was looking for. The girl was in her mid-20s. Her hair was silver. Her face was carefully made up. She wore house pajamas, the blouse unzipped and hanging loose. She was sitting in a woven plastic chair, knitting. She wore nothing under the blouse, and she did not trouble to close it before his eyes. Her look was angry. "Sorry, friend, we're closed. Big Ginny." He closed the door behind him. "I know all about Big Ginny. Name's Graham, I gunth." He did not give her a chance to talk. He prowled the room quickly, cataloging the bare dresser, the neat little night table by the bed with its neat little stack of folded linen just visible behind a partially closed door. Obviously, these were her working quarters. No nudes on the wall, no pink tassels on the bedspread. The room was efficient, but not quite Spartan. "How many tricks you average a week? You ever have any rough stuff?" She stood up, the loose open blouse swirling around her breasts. "Beat it! You got no right coming in here like this!" Graham sighed and reached for the sovereign medicine for irritated gunthies. He peeled off 3 doses in the $50 denomination and passed them over to her. "My dear," he explained, "I got a whole planet to cover and not enough time to retrace my steps. I doubt I'll be back here, and this is the only fun house on Mars. A little cooperation, please? Now, I won't ask your name, or if you have a mother, but I do want to know how a nice girl like you, etc. Specifically, how did you get to Mars?" The girl thumbed the money. As Graham knew, the standard price was $50 for the rental of her favors. Naturally, she would want more for the essentially more revealing task of talking, but $150 should be a fair price for that. It was. She shrugged and laid the money on the night table. "Why not? Let's see. I was working in Altoona around the yards. Small house, just 3 of us. I was kind of new. One of the girls told me about Pitco's special service department. Well, my daddy almost went to Mars before I was born. Then the kids started coming, but he always talked about it. I took the physical and... Say, you just don't have any idea what a physical is, brother!" She giggled and bent to retrieve her knitting, her pajama jacket flapping. "Well, I passed. The doctor said... Anyway, they thought I'd make out fine. And I have." "Any trouble with the men?" Graham watched her face. Relaxed, it was quite attractive, and she certainly had a remarkable figure. "No trouble at all. The fellows here are a lot nicer, believe me. I mean, you get the oddballs and everything, but there aren't so many. That's Altoona. Here, it's more like friends, you know?" "What about marriage?" asked the reporter, adding another 50. "And, by the way, slip out of your clothes, will you?" The girl looked startled for a moment, but hers was not a profession which retains much capacity for startlement. "Pitco doesn't allow marriage," she said, peeling the blouse and stepping out of her trousers. She wore nothing underneath the trousers either. It's in the contract. Of course, in 5 years I can do what I like. She postured like a fashion model, gracefully pirouetting. Graham nodded judiciously. She had an excellent figure indeed. He walked around her, studying it, while he got the answers to his questions, and, still more valuable, her steady chatter of comment and sidelight. He let her talk. Mars gravity was kind of funny until he got used to it, but really, everything was just about the same all over. And Big Ginny had been her dearest friend, but she would try to take the men away, and it was too bad about the killing, but the new girl would help out with the work, and did Grant think the new girl was prettier? Not prettier than you, no, he said. Why don't you turn down the bed? He reached in his pocket for another 50, watching the graceful curve of her back as she obeyed. There was plenty of time, and what was the use of having an expense account if you didn't use it? At that, he beat the doctor back to the parlor. 2 men in miners' leathers were waiting. Graham was questioning them idly about living conditions in the camp when the doctor walked in. I'm Dr. Hellman from Sun Lake, Tony said. I want to ask you about finding Big Ginny. Hell, Doc, said one of the miners. We just walked over that way, and there she was. I said to Sam, it's Big Ginny, jeez, and he says some cheapskate must have hit her on the head. And we tried to bring her around, but she wouldn't come to, so we made her comfortable, and we went and told Mary, and then we went back to shift. That's all there is to it, said the other miner. But it wasn't one of our boys. You ask me, it was one of those communist crackpots from over your place, all the time reading. Drives you nuts, did you know that? How is the old bag, Doc? Is she yelling for her money? She's dead, the doctor said shortly. Thanks for the information. He sat down and took out his notebook and pen, found a blank page, and carefully recorded what he had seen, without adding any of his conclusions. He signed his name, folded, and handed the sheet to Mary Sims. When you give the doctor this, he said, please tell him I was sorry I couldn't stay to see him. We're having big times over at our place. 10 new colonists. He smiled. 9 immigrants, and a new baby. Boy or girl? She asked with sudden interest. How is it? Is it all right? Was it hard? A boy. Fair condition. Normal delivery. That's nice, she said with a musing smile. Then she was all business again. Thank you for coming, Doctor. I can make some coffee for you while you're waiting for Mr. Hackenberg. We have real coffee, you know. I didn't know, he told her. I'll take 2 cups.